After my wife died, the landlord of the house she had been renting called me unexpectedly. "Come here right now," he said. "I found something you need to see, and whatever you do, don't tell anyone." He sounded nervous, almost afraid. I didn't ask why. I just got in my car and drove straight there, my heart pounding the entire way. When I opened the door, what I saw made me stumble backward. The room spun, and I nearly collapsed where I stood. 3 days after we buried Loretta, I settled into our living room, eyes fixed on the empty recliner sitting across from mine. 45 years of marriage, and now the quiet had a weight to it, heavy enough to press down on your chest. The house didn't feel right without her. It was like stepping into a room and losing the thought that brought you there, except that lost feeling never lifted. My mind kept circling back to the funeral. The faces in the crowd, some familiar, some total strangers to me. Wave after wave of condolences, each one blurring into the next until the words stopped meaning anything at all. Welcome to Honor Revenge Stories. I'm glad you found your way here. Before we go any further, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Is this your first time sitting down with one of these stories, or have you been with me a while? Either way, you belong here. One quick note. Some elements of this story have been dramatized for the telling, and any resemblance to specific real people or events is purely coincidental. What matters is the truth underneath it. There's a particular brutality to standing at a frozen graveside in February watching a casket descend into ground, hard as concrete, while a pastor who never once shook Loretta's hand recited boilerplate about eternal peace. That image wouldn't leave me, but something else was working at me too. Diane and her husband Brett had rolled in late. I was already at the graveside with the others when car doors cracked the quiet across the parking lot. The two of them came picking their way through the headstones. Diane's heels punching holes in the soft ground, with every step Brett steering her by the elbow, as though she might fold without him. They wedged into the back row just before the pastor got going. Up at the podium during my eulogy, I swept the gathered mourners and found Diane's face. The second our eyes met, she dropped her gaze and brought a tissue to her cheeks, dry cheeks. Brett stood next to her like a post jaw locked so hard I could see the muscle jumping from 20 ft away. Not a single tear from him. He wasn't even pretending to listen. His eyes stayed fixed on the casket, wearing an expression I couldn't decode. Then, at the reception, barely an hour in, they made for the door. "Dad needs his rest," Diane announced, though those words had never left my mouth. What I actually needed was the people I loved nearby. What I needed was something to fill the hollow where Loretta used to be. But before I'd gotten through a second cup of coffee, they'd gone, Brett steering Diane out like he had somewhere better to be. 3 days on, and I hadn't received so much as a text. The phone split the quiet of the house wide open. I nearly let the machine take it. Another round of "I'm so sorry" and "she's in a better place" wasn't something I could stomach, as if any of us had the faintest idea what that better place looked like. I answered anyway. Old habits die hard. "Mr. Caldwell." The voice I knew, even if the tone was all business. Vernon Pruitt, our landlord owner of the Pruitt building. The address where Loretta and I had run Caldwell Antiques for the better part of a decade. "I hate to pull you away from everything, but I've come across something. Something Loretta left in my keeping before the end." My chest tightened. "What kind of something?" "Not over the phone." Vernon's voice fell until it was barely above a breath. "Come to my office up in the Pruitt building above the shop. Can you make the drive?" "Vernon, I'm not sure I can." "Mr. Caldwell." Something in the way he said it reached through the fog and grabbed me. Call it fear, call it desperation, whatever it was real. "One more thing, sir. Don't breathe a word to Diane or Brett. Don't let them know you're coming." I straightened in my chair. "What in God's name for—" "Because Loretta asked me to keep it that way." A pause. I heard him pull in a ragged breath. "She said your life might depend on it." The call dropped. I sat holding the phone while my pulse hammered the inside of my ribs. 72 years old, and my body still remembered that particular rush, the same flood of adrenaline that used to hit in Vietnam the instant somebody screamed, "Incoming." Could be a setup. Some con worked out to prey on a grieving widower with money and no defenses. I wasn't the man I'd been 50 years ago. That was plain enough every morning when my knees announced themselves getting out of bed, and every time a single flight of stairs left me winded. If somebody meant me harm, I was ripe for it. But Vernon had spoken Loretta's name, had told me she'd left something, and that line, "Your life might depend on it," you don't reach for words like that unless you mean them. Even if the odds were against it, I had to find out. I levered myself out of the chair joints, cataloging every complaint, and took a last look at the living room. Loretta's reading glasses still sat on the side table beside her chair. Her book, some thriller about a disappearance at sea, lay open, a bookmark holding her place. She'd never get back to it. No, stop. She was gone. I'd stood there while they sealed the lid, watched the box drop into the earth, and let a fist of frozen soil fall from my own hand onto the polished wood. Heard it knock like something hollow. I pulled on my coat all the same. Outside, the cold came at me like an open hand, the kind that scorches rather than chills. Steel gray sky threatening sleet. My fingers fumbled the car keys, trembling in a way the cold alone couldn't explain. Trap or no trap, I'd made my decision. I'd soldiered once. Whatever was waiting at the Pruitt building, I'd faced worse. And if Loretta had genuinely left something behind, a message, a truth, a farewell, I never received at the hospital, then walking away wasn't something I could live with. I buckled in and fired the engine. What I had no way of knowing, as I backed out of the drive and pointed the car downtown, was that every story I'd told myself about how my wife had died was about to crack apart. The man I'd been 72 hours ago, a grieving widower, ready to let old age quietly close the book on him, was about to pick up a weapon one final time. 20 minutes later, I was standing at the bottom of a tight staircase running up the back side of the Pruitt building. The steps seemed to have multiplied since I last climbed them, or more likely I'd just accumulated more years. I found the wooden railing and held on, whether that was caution or nerves I genuinely couldn't say. Every instinct sharpened across 2 tours in the jungles of Vietnam, 50 years back, told me the situation I was walking into was wrong, or perhaps impossibly that it was the first right thing in 3 days. One step, then the next. My knees filed their usual grievance with each one, that grinding bone-deep ache that comes as the tax on 7 decades of wear and tear. The stairwell smelled like linseed oil and cedar, and it reached into me and twisted. That was Loretta's smell soaked into the plaster, and the wood over 30 years of her running Caldwell Antiques out of this building, the one we'd leased from Vernon all that time. The smell of her work, clinging to these walls, the same way her memory clung to everything in my head. The second-floor corridor was gloomy, one bare bulb pulling long shadows across the floor. Vernon's office sat at the far-end door, cracked an inch, no light leaking out. For a beat, I thought about reversing course driving home, putting the phone call in a drawer in my mind and leaving it shut. But I'd made the trip, and soldiers don't peel off just because their nerve is fraying. I opened the door. Vernon was at the window, the flat gray light from the dusty glass carving him into a silhouette. He turned as I came in, and what I read on his face was something I'd never seen there in all our years as tenant and landlord. Not fear exactly, not relief exactly, something suspended between the two, and it made my pulse kick. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, keeping his voice low, "I appreciate you making it out here." "All right, Vernon." I moved into the room and let the door fall closed. "Tell me what this is. What did Loretta leave behind?" Then a shift in the shadows behind him, over near the filing cabinets. Motion. A figure. A woman came forward into the light. My legs quit on me. I seized the doorframe, fingers digging into the wood, my lungs losing the thread of what they were supposed to do. What my eyes were sending to my brain made no sense. There was no architecture in me for it, no way to reconcile the fact I'd carried for 3 days with the image standing 3FT in front of me. Loretta, my wife, alive, like she'd only stepped out for groceries and gotten back a little late. "Walter," she whispered. That voice, it broke something open behind my sternum. I hadn't cried, not at the service, not since. I'd kept it locked down, but it came now, all of it at once, fast and scalding. She was already crying. Those tears I could have identified blindfolded after 45 years together. Happy tears, sad tears, furious tears, every kind all layered together. I can't account for crossing the distance between us. One moment I was rooted in the doorway, heart battering the inside of my chest. Then my arms were around her, real weight, real warmth, real. Her heartbeat under my hand, the rhythm I'd drifted off beside for decades, her breath at my neck. Her fists knotted in the back of my shirt as though releasing me would make me evaporate. Real. Alive. How? The word tore coming out. I drew back just enough to look at her face, to press my palm to her cheek, to give my mind the proof it was screaming for. I saw the casket go into the ground. I threw dirt on it myself. The whole family was standing there. How? She took my face between her hands. Those hands. At the altar on our wedding day. In the delivery room when Diane arrived. Then Garrett 2 years after that. Across kitchen tables and hospital corridors over restaurant booths for 45 years. Hands I had said my last goodbye to. I had no choice, Walter. The softness was gone from her voice now. What replaced it was iron. They were going to kill me, the same way they killed Garrett. The floor seemed to shift under me. What? The word existed in English. I spoke English, but the meaning slid off like water off glass and wouldn't go in. Garrett, no. The police had ruled it, and our son hadn't taken his own life. Loretta's eyes locked onto mine, and what I found in them stopped me cold. Not grief, not desperation, certainty. The absolute bedrock kind that doesn't leave room for argument. Garrett was murdered, and I have proof. She pulled away from me, and losing that contact hurt like something being peeled back and crossed to Vernon's desk, where she picked up something I hadn't registered until that moment. A journal. Leather-bound edges soft, with use a name written on the cover in handwriting I would have known in the dark. Garrett's handwriting. That careful, deliberate script I'd taught him when I showed him how to keep a field journal at age 12. Always write clearly, son, I'd told him. Someday your life might depend on someone being able to read what you wrote. God almighty, had it come to that. Brett killed Garrett. Loretta said it plainly, and every word landed like a fist. My son-in-law. The man who'd married my daughter 7 years ago. The man who'd stood weeping at Garrett's funeral with a handkerchief pressed to his face. That Brett, no. I shook my head. Brett wouldn't. He did. Loretta's voice had no give in it. And then he came after me. I saw it coming just in time. She walked back to me, cradling the journal like it was something both sacred and dangerous. Vernon stayed at the window, not speaking, letting us have the space. This is Garrett's, Loretta said quietly. He kept it out of sight, recorded everything he uncovered, everything Brett had been doing. She looked up, and in her face I saw 4.5 decades of marriage distilled the trust, the partnership every hard year and good year we'd carried together. Walter, I need you to read this. You need to understand what really happened to our son. She set the journal in my hands, my fingers closed around it without thinking, feeling the worn leather registering the weight of it. I looked down at Garrett's name on the cover, the dates, and below them in smaller letters, the truth. I stood there in Vernon Pruitt's dusty office, gripping my dead son's journal, looking at my supposedly dead wife, and felt the last 3 days, the last 2 years split open. Everything I'd believed about Garrett's death, everything I'd mourned, everything I'd swallowed, as fact of fabrication top to bottom. I couldn't pull my eyes away from Garrett's handwriting, my son's words set down in the weeks before he died, before he was murdered. The difference in those 2 words meant everything now, and the weight of it sat directly on my sternum. Loretta guided me toward a chair. I hadn't noticed my legs were trembling until I was off them. Vernon moved to the office door and twisted the lock. The click was sharp in the small room. Read it, Loretta said softly. Then I'll tell you the rest. My hands shook as I turned to the first page. Garrett's careful, even script filled every line, the same methodical approach to documentation I'd drummed into him when he was 12 years old. A soldier keeps records. Facts matter. Details save lives. He'd held on to that. Week 1. Found discrepancies in Caldwell manufacturing accounts. $12,000 missing from quarterly reports. Week 3 traced payments to Brett's personal account. He's been embezzling for at least 2 years. Deposits match up with company losses. Week 6 confirmed total $287,000 stolen. Found betting slips in Brett's desk drawer when I stopped by their house. Heavy losses. He's got a gambling problem. Bad one. My eyes went blurry. I pressed through it and read on. Week 8. Confronted Brett today at his office. Gave him 48 hours to come clean to Dad and pay it back. He begged for more time. Said he owed money to someone dangerous. Started crying. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. That entry was dated 3 days before Garrett died. The page after it was empty. I raised my head. Loretta was watching me with a look I recognized, the same look she'd had when the call came about Garrett's death 2 years back. Except now there were no tears. Now her face was stone. He gave Brett a chance. I said, my voice not much more than breath. Garrett tried to give him a way out, and Brett killed him for it. Loretta moved to the chair across from mine. Vernon stayed at the door, still as a post. Walter. She chose her words carefully. Everything the police pinned on Garrett, the gambling, the embezzlement, the pills, it was all Brett. He set Garrett up to bury his own crimes. How do you know? Even asking it, I had the journal sitting right there in my lap. But I needed to hear it out loud, needed her to walk me through how this had happened while none of us saw it. Loretta lifted a manila folder from Vernon's desk. 6 months ago, I came across Garrett's journal in his old apartment. The landlord was finally clearing out his storage unit. I'd been putting off going through Garrett's things, but something pulled me there that day. She opened the folder and laid it out: photographs, bank statements, copies of betting receipts, Brett's name running through all of it. I hired a private investigator. Through Vernon, someone careful, someone who wouldn't talk. Everything checked out, Vernon said quietly. Brett had embezzled $287,000 across 27 months. He owed $300,000 to a loan shark named Vincent Merlo. Merlo ran operations out of Detroit Gambling Loans Collections. When Garrett turned up the embezzlement, Brett saw only one exit: Vincent Merlo. I stored the name, adding it to the ledger of people who had a hand in my son's death. The investigator pieced together what happened that night, Loretta said. Her voice was controlled, but I could detect the fault line running beneath it. She'd gone over this many times in her head. I understood, rehearsed it, while I was home, drowning in grief, unaware she was still breathing. Brett had gone to Garrett's apartment, brought an expensive bottle of wine, Garrett's favorite Pinot Noir. They talked. Brett worked on Garrett to share a drink while they sorted things out. The wine was drugged, I said. It wasn't a question. Sleeping pills enough to be lethal. Loretta's hands pressed tight against her knees. Brett made Garrett drink it, then he sat and waited. Once Garrett was unconscious, Brett set the scene, planted the fake betting receipts, typed the suicide note on Garrett's computer, then called 911 at 3:00 in the morning, his voice breaking, claiming he'd swung by to check on his brother-in-law and found him not breathing. Rage built in my chest like something with heat and mass. The police believed him, Vernon said. Brett had played the shattered family member without a crack showing, and with the planted evidence making Garrett look like the embezzler, the gambler, the man who'd cracked under the pressure, the police filed it as suicide. Closed. Settled. I believed it too. The words coated my mouth in ash. I had thought my son was a thief. I'd thought he was too broken to. I couldn't push through to the end of that sentence. Loretta reached across the gap between our chairs and covered my hand with hers. Brett counted on exactly that. He tore apart Garrett's name to protect himself, and it held until I found the journal. Why didn't you come to me right away? The words came out with more edge than I meant. 6 months, Loretta. You've held this for 6 months. Her face shifted. Guilt, regret, something that sat close to shame. Because I made a mistake. I went to Brett myself. She almost laughed, but nothing about it was funny. I thought I could reason with him, convince him to confess, maybe even persuade him to turn himself in. Loretta. I know. She raised a hand to stop me. I know how that sounds, but I wasn't in a clear state of mind. Our son's killer was married to our daughter. I told myself that if I could just reach him, somehow maybe I could protect Diane from the full weight of the truth. My voice climbed. Brett murdered Garrett, and you thought you could sit down and talk sense into him. I was wrong. Her voice fractured on the words. 2 weeks ago, I overheard him on the phone. He was in the study, didn't realize I was in the hallway. Her hands tightened in her lap. He told someone, the old lady knows too much, just like Garrett. We'll handle it the same way. The room went quiet except for my own ragged breathing. He tried to kill you, I said. He put something in my afternoon tea. I caught his reflection in the kitchen window as he did it. Loretta's voice evened out. I'd been watching him for days by that point, waiting to see what he'd do. Vernon and I already had a plan in place with Dr. Leonard Whitfield. That name I knew. The cardiologist, old colleague from medical school, Loretta said. I called him and laid out everything. He agreed to help me stage my death. Vernon stepped forward. The substance Brett used was designed to produce what would present as a natural cardiac event. Fast-acting, difficult to flag in a standard toxicology screen. He'd thought it through. But I was ready, Loretta said. I swapped my teacup for one, holding a specialized sedative Dr. Whitfield had prepared for me. It mimicked the signs of death convincingly enough to fool the paramedics and the first coroner's pass. Leonard had signed the death certificate himself. I looked at my wife, the woman I'd shared 45 years, with the woman I believed I understood completely. She had staged her own death, constructed an intricate deception, and let me grieve for 3 days while she kept herself hidden in Vernon Pruitt's office. Now you let me bury an empty casket, I said. I let you stay alive. Her eyes went hot. If Brett knew I'd survived, he would have come at me again, and he wouldn't have left it to chance the second time. This way, he thinks he's won. He thinks he got away with killing both our son and his own mother-in-law. I was on my feet before I knew I'd moved. The chair shrieked across the floor behind me. I'm going to kill him. No. Loretta was up too, her hand locking around my arm with more force than I expected. That's exactly what he'd want. You go at him. He screams self-defense, plays the victim all over again. We have to be smarter than that. Smarter. I could barely hold my voice steady. He murdered Garrett. He tried to murder you. How much smarter do we have to be smart enough to make him confess? Loretta said, on record with evidence that will stand up in court and restore Garrett's name for good. She moved to Vernon's desk and lifted a small digital recorder, no bigger than a matchbook. Vernon produced a tiny microphone from a drawer. Loretta slid both across the desk toward me. Are you ready to go to war, Walter? I looked at the equipment, then I looked at my wife, my living, breathing, unbroken wife who had outmaneuvered a killer and come back from the grave to fight for our son. Something locked into place inside me, something dormant since Vietnam, since the last time someone needed to know if I was ready to move. Tell me the plan. The next 3 hours we converted Vernon's cramped office into a command center. Outside, the sun went down, pulling long shadows over the desk, where we'd laid out Garrett's journal legal documents and the surveillance gear. I hadn't felt this way in decades, not since my last rotation in Vietnam. A clear sense of mission, of purpose with edges on it. Here's what we're gonna do, I said, planting my hands on Vernon's desk the way I used to lean over maps in a command tent. The old instincts were still in there. They'd just been biding their time. We need 3 things: opportunity or evidence, and an exit strategy. Loretta watched me from her chair, wearing a look I hadn't seen since our early years. Pride tangled up with worry, the same expression she'd had when I re-enlisted for my second tour, like she knew she couldn't stop me, but wished she could. The opportunity, I went on pulling the legal pad Vernon had set out, is attorney Gerald Dunbar. Vernon, you've dealt with him. He handled the Caldwell Antiques lease paperwork. Good man, Vernon said. Discreet, reliable. Perfect. You'll arrange for him to come to my house tomorrow afternoon. He'll present a fabricated will, Loretta's supposed final wishes. I laid out the framework, putting into a trust fund worth $2.5 million in my name. But here's the hook. It comes with a competency requirement. A competency requirement. Vernon leaned in. If a licensed medical professional rules me mentally incompetent within 6 months, the trust locks up for 10 years. But if I stay competent, the money is mine to control outright. I glanced at Loretta. Brett's going to see dollar signs, and plenty of them. He'll need me coherent enough to sign documents and make decisions, but pliable enough to steer. Loretta's eyes sharpened. So, he has to keep you alive and functional. Exactly, it buys us time. I moved to the next point. While he's busy playing the devoted son-in-law, I'll be building the case against him. I picked up the recording equipment from the desk. I'll plant these through the house myself. Bedroom, living room, kitchen. Old tradecraft from my service days, tuck them into vents under furniture places Brett won't think to sweep. That covers the evidence. Which leaves the exit strategy, Vernon said. A code phrase. I pulled out my own phone. Old flip model, refused to give it up. If things go wrong, if I'm in genuine danger, I text you one line. I looked at Loretta. Loretta's garden needs tending. That's the signal for Vernon to call Detective Owen Bradshaw immediately. Bradshaw. Loretta's brow creased. The detective who worked Garrett's case. The very one. He was the only officer who didn't seem fully sold on the suicide ruling. Called me twice after it closed, asking whether Garrett had shown signs of depression. At the time, I thought he was just being thorough. I understood those calls differently now. His instincts were telling him something was wrong. He just couldn't make it stick. When we bring him evidence, he'll act on it. Vernon jotted a note. I'll keep my phone on around the clock. I'll get you Bradshaw's direct line. I turned to Loretta. Which brings me to the hardest piece. I held her gaze. You stay here with Vernon. No contact with anyone outside this room. Walter. If Brett finds out you're alive, it's over, I said, keeping my voice even. He'll run or he'll come at us both with nothing holding him back. Right now he believes he's safe. That belief is the only weapon we have. Loretta stood and came toward me. You're asking me to hide away while you walk straight into harm's way. I'm asking you to trust me. I took her hands. I was a soldier. Infiltration, intelligence, knowing the right moment to strike, that's what I'm built for. I held her fingers tightly. Can you give me that trust? She studied my face for a long moment. After 45 years, she could read every current moving beneath the surface. Every tell, every bluff, every truth I'd ever tried to conceal. You're not only doing this for justice, she said quietly. You want revenge. I didn't argue the point. I'm doing this for Garrett, for you, for every day I carried the belief that our son was something he wasn't. My voice went rough. But yes, I want Brett to know he failed. I want him to see me on my feet when he expected to find me shattered. Loretta stepped in and held me. Her head found the place under my chin it had occupied for decades. Be careful. I just got you back. I can't lose you for real this time. You won't. I made the promise even though we both understood I couldn't back it. Vernon cleared his throat with deliberate tact. One more thing, Mr. Caldwell. He produced a basic handset from his desk drawer. Prepaid, untraceable. Loretta and I are the only ones with the number. Send us updates by text. Voice calls only if there's a genuine emergency. If Brett goes through your regular phone, there'll be nothing there to find. I took the phone and felt its weight settle in my palm, cold compact like picking up a sidearm again. What's your cover? Loretta asked. How do you play at a shattered widower, barely keeping it together? I let my shoulders drop, let my face go hollow and vacant. The shift took only seconds. I'd learned it in POW and SEER, training how to project defeat when you were whole, how to appear diminished when you were coiling to strike. I'll shuffle when I walk, lose my train of thought mid-sentence, act like someone who misplaced himself the moment you were gone. I stood straight again. They'll see an easy mark. They won't see that they're the ones in the crosshairs. Loretta touched my face. Tomorrow morning, you walk back into that house and become someone you're not. No. I caught her hand and pressed it against my cheek. Tomorrow I become exactly who I've always been. A soldier, a father, a husband who won't stand by while the man who destroyed his family goes unpunished. We ended it with a long kiss. Maybe our last. I refused to let that thought take hold, but it was there between us, quiet as smoke. Loretta held my face once more. I've trusted you for 45 years, Walter Caldwell. I'm not about to stop now. I walked out of Vernon's office as the clock struck 9. The street outside was vacant. February cold, cutting straight through my coat. Come morning, I'd pull back into the driveway of the house Loretta and I had shared for 30 years. The one where Brett and Diane were probably already settling in, convinced they were safe. I'd step through that door and give the performance of my life. The broken old man, the easy mark, the grieving widower with nothing left to fight for. They believed they'd won. They thought they were dealing with a 72-year-old with bad knees and a dimming mind. They had no idea what was bearing down on them. Next morning, I took the drive home, slowly rehearsing every detail. Every turn of the wheel felt like steering toward my own grave. The Walter Caldwell, they knew the one who'd put his wife in the ground. 3 days ago, the one who moved through life wrapped in grief was about to step into the spotlight. Or so they needed to believe. Diane's car was already in my driveway when I rolled in. That wasn't part of any act. I genuinely hadn't expected it, and the frown that crossed my face was real. I hadn't asked her to stay over. I parked, made myself shuffle toward the front door, shoulders rounded, steps unsteady. An old man hollowed out by loss. The door opened before my hand reached it. Dad! Diane came out fast and wrapped her arms around me. Her perfume hit like something chemical, too sweet, layered, too thick, like she'd applied it with a heavy hand. We were so worried. Where did you go? Over her shoulder, I could see Brett standing in my living room, in my house. His expression was calibrated to the millimeter concerned, son-in-law worried family man. But his eyes were doing something else entirely, measuring, calculating. Just driving around, I mumbled, letting my voice go fuzzy at the edges. Needed some air. You shouldn't be out alone right now, Dad. Brett moved forward, smooth as oil on water. Diane and I talked it over. We're going to stay for a while, help you get through all of this. I blinked slowly like the words were taking time to land. Inside, every instinct Vietnam had sharpened in me was firing at once. They'd already moved in. The operation was accelerating faster than I'd mapped it out. That's very kind of you. I managed. The doorbell rang. Perfect timing. Attorney Gerald Dunbar was on the porch, briefcase in hand, his face arranged in the appropriate expression of condolence. "Mr. Caldwell, my sympathies again. May I come in? I need to speak with you about Loretta's will." I brought everyone to the dining room. Dunbar was flawless, measured, professional, not a seam showing. He opened his briefcase with the unhurried ease of a man who'd done this 1,000 times. "Loretta made arrangements before her passing," he said, drawing out the documents. "She's left you her full estate consolidated into a trust fund worth $2.5 million. I kept my gaze on the paperwork, but my focus was on Brett. At the edge of my vision, I caught his eyes flare, just barely, just for a beat, before he pulled the mask back into place. But I'd seen it. Raw, hungry greed. However, Dunbar went on, and I noticed Brett lean forward almost imperceptibly. "There is a competency requirement. Loretta wanted the funds properly protected. If within 6 months you are found mentally incompetent by a licensed medical professional, the trust locks for 10 years. But if your competency holds, you have full control." Competent. I repeated, letting the words sit clumsy on my tongue. Yes, I understand." Brett spoke up, working to sound offhand. "What exactly does competency mean in this context? Capacity to manage daily affairs, make sound decisions, understand financial matters." Dunbar answered, reciting it like a statute. "Standard evaluation criteria. Loretta's intention was to shield Walter from any potential exploitation." A muscle jumped in Brett's jaw, once quick, almost nothing. Had Loretta anticipated him even then, or was Dunbar going off script, brilliantly slipping that last word in like a knife slipped between ribs? Dunbar collected his papers, 20 minutes later, shook my hand and took his leave. "I'll follow up next week, Mr. Caldwell. Take care of yourself." After his car disappeared from view, I watched Brett's composure slip for maybe half a second. His eyes tracked the attorney's departure, and behind the devoted family member facade, I saw the predator running the numbers. $2.5 million. One old man. 6 months. He believed he'd found his opening. He had no idea he'd stepped into an ambush I'd spent 3 hours constructing the night before. "Dad, you should rest," Diane said, her voice wound tight around something I couldn't quite name. Guilt, fear, or both sitting on top of each other. "Yes," I agreed, letting my voice wobble. "I am tired." I climbed the stairs and left them to it. From my bedroom, sound carried through the heating vent, their voices below muffled but audible. Good. If I could pick them up through the ductwork, the recording devices I'd plant tomorrow would capture everything. That night, I lay still, listening to whispered conversation, bleeding through the guest room wall. I pressed my ear against the plaster and kept my breathing quiet. 3 days, Brett's voice low and taut. That's how long we have to get him to sign a power of attorney. After that, things get complicated with Merlot. Diane murmured something I couldn't decode. "I don't care," Brett said, his voice climbing, then dropping. "We are too close to fail now. Do you understand that? We are too damn close." I eased away from the wall and reached under my pillow for the Nokia, texted Vernon. "They're here. 3-day countdown. Performance successful." His reply arrived within seconds. "Stay safe. Loretta worried but trusts you." I typed back, "Tell her I love her and I'm winning." I put the phone away and fixed my eyes on the ceiling. 3 days before, Brett made his play. 3 days to endure and collect evidence. The recording devices were still in the trunk of my car. First thing in the morning, while they assumed I was shuffling around in a daze, I'd get them planted. The trap was in place. The bait was set. All that remained was staying alive long enough to close the jaws. Through the wall, Brett's footsteps moved back and forth, back and forth. A caged animal feeling the walls close in. Good. Let the pressure build. Let him slip. Every mistake he made was another step toward justice for Garrett, another step toward putting Loretta's would-be killer where he belonged. I woke the next morning to find my bedroom door locked from the outside. I thought at first I'd made an error, tried the handle once, then again. The lock held the sound of it flat and final in the quiet house. Day 1 as a prisoner in my own home. Brett's voice came through the woods, smooth and solicitous. "Sorry about this. It's for your safety. We heard you trying to leave in the night. You were wandering. We can't have you getting hurt or lost." I hadn't gone anywhere. I'd been flat on my back all night, ear to the wall, cataloging their arguments. But I said nothing. Just set my palm against the door and felt the solid barrier between us. Breakfast came an hour later. dry crackers and lukewarm water. Enough to avoid obvious neglect, not enough to keep a man of my size sustained. I recognized the method at once: deprivation, isolation, softening the target. What they hadn't accounted for was that I'd been through POW and SEER training. I knew how to endure. I spent day one mapping the room, the way I'd mapped holding cells and training exercises back in '68. The floorboard near the radiator shifted when I stepped on it, a faint telltale creak. I worked it loose and found a cavity beneath, maybe 6 in deep. Exactly right for the recording device I'd slipped into my jacket pocket the day before. The window opened, though it was a 15 FT drop to the garden. I worked the latch functional, an exit route if everything fell apart. The radiator pipe could be pulled free with real effort. Iron that heavy would serve as a weapon if it came to that. I wasn't a helpless old man sitting in a locked room. I was establishing a perimeter. Diane brought lunch. More crackers, more water. Her hands shook as she set the tray on the nightstand, her eyes finding nothing above the floor. "Diane," I said gently, keeping my voice frail and uncertain. She flinched as if I'd raised it. "I'm sorry, Dad. Brett says it's just until you're feeling better." "Better," I said, and let the word float there. She left without answering. Once the door closed, I activated the recording device and tucked it beneath the loose floorboard. Anything spoken in the hallway outside would now be caught. Every threat, every plan, every careless word. Day 2 brought the same routine: minimal food, water walls. I used the Nokia to check in with Vernon, locked in bedroom proceeding as planned. "Don't worry, Loretta." His reply was fast. "She's terrified for you. Stay strong." I sent back, "Tell her I love her and I'm winning." The honest answer was more complicated than that. My body was beginning to register the deprivation joints grinding more than usual, a hollowness settling into my core. But I'd been hungry before, uncomfortable before. This was nothing against 3 days pinned down outside Da Nang, with no rations and nothing to drink except what we filtered out of a muddy stream. That night, a little before 11, heavy, uneven footsteps stopped outside my door. Brett had been drinking. Whiskey, I could smell it seeping through the gap at the bottom. "You know what your problem is." His voice was thick, talking to himself, or to me through the door, hard to say. "You all think you're so much better. Garrett with his righteousness. Loretta with her suspicions. You with your goddamn war hero act." I didn't move, barely breathed. The recording device was running under the floorboard. "They don't understand." Brett's voice rose, then caught itself. "Vincent Merlo doesn't forgive debts. He destroys people. I did what I had to do. Garrett was going to ruin everything. Always in my way. Both of you, always in my way." There it was, partial confirmation. Not enough to nail a murder charge, not yet. But enough to know Loretta had read every detail correctly. Enough to know my son had died because he'd positioned himself between Brett and his escape. Then Diane's voice, distant and strained, "Come to bed." The footsteps withdrew. I let out a slow breath, my heart knocking hard against my ribs. I gave it 5 minutes, then 10. Then I pulled the recording device from beneath the floorboard and played it back. Brett's drunken monologue came through sharp and clear. I texted Vernon, partial confession recorded. He's starting to crack. But I knew it wasn't enough. I needed him to say it plainly. The sleeping pills, the stage scene, the deliberate campaign to bury my son's good name along with his body. I needed the words, not just the anger behind them. Tomorrow was day 3, Brett's deadline with Vincent Merlo. Whatever scheme he'd cooked up, whatever desperate play he intended to make, it was almost here. I lay back and kept the detached radiator pipe close at hand. He wanted to come through that door with violence on his mind. I'd be ready for him. Through the wall, I heard him wearing a track in the guest room floor. That relentless back and forth of a man watching his options close off one by one. Good. Let it build. Let the walls press in, because that kind of pressure made men careless. I was counting on exactly that. Morning light filtered through my bedroom window on the 3rd day. The lock turned. Diane stepped in with my breakfast tray, dry crackers, and lukewarm water, same as before. This time, she didn't retreat. She stood there with the tray trembling in her grip, tears running soundlessly down her face. "Diane." I stripped all hardness from my voice. The tray hit the nightstand with a clatter. She folded onto the edge of my bed, shoulders heaving with sobs held back far too long. I let her go, said nothing. Silence was the finest instrument in my arsenal, always had been. "I'm so sorry, Daddy." The whisper finally came. That word drove straight through me. She hadn't said it since she was 12. For what, sweetheart? For all of it. Red-rimmed eyes lifted to mine. I think Brett did something to Gary. I think he's been lying about what happened. My pulse climbed, but my face gave nothing away. What makes you say that? The week before Gary died, he showed up at our place well past midnight. Her voice fractured. He said he needed to warn me about Brett, that Brett was in serious trouble, that I had to watch myself. I assumed it was just friction between them at work. Brothers-in-law stuff. What exactly did Gary tell you? He said Brett had made dangerous choices, that people were going to get hurt. She wiped her eyes. He was scared. Dad Gary was never scared. But that night he was genuinely terrified. He held me tight and said, "If anything happens to me, remember I tried to do the right thing." Then her voice broke entirely. The next day, Gary was dead. The story everyone told, the gambling, the theft, the pills. She looked at me with desperate eyes. But that wasn't Gary. You knew him? I know, I said quietly. After the funeral, I came across something. Shaking hands, drew out her phone. A message on Brett's phone. He'd left it on the counter and the screen lit up. She showed me what it said. Old message sender logged as AC. Problem solved. Brother-in-law won't talk now. Make sure old man believes the story. Cold fury moved through me like a current. Did you take that to Brett? I tried. Her voice fell. He seized me, threw me against the wall, and spelled it out. If I said a word to anyone, he'd claim I helped him, that I'd known about the money all along, that I was in on it. She rolled up her sleeve. Faded bruises stained her forearm. He said I'd be arrested, that I'd lose everything, my job, my freedom, you and Mom. She was shaking. I'm frightened all the time. It keeps getting worse. The drinking, the rage, and now with you in here and Mom gone, I can see it plainly. The fear, the control. Diane wasn't wicked. She was caged. Brett had been working on her for years, and I had been too hollowed out by grief to see what was right in front of me. I was weak, she said. I should have come to you, gone to the police. But what if I'd been wrong? What if I'd blown up my whole life over nothing? But you knew, I said softly. I knew. She nodded, and I stayed quiet. I let Gary's name get dragged through the mud. Now, Brett has you locked in this room, and I know what he's about to do. I know he's going to. She stopped, hand pressed to her mouth. What's he planning? Diane, I don't know exactly. I overheard part of a call. Merlot's name came up. Brett owes him an enormous amount. Merlot wants it now. She clutched my hand. Whatever Brett does to raise that money, it involves you, and I don't believe he intends for you to walk away after. This was the fulcrum. Push too hard and she'd shut down. Lay it gently, and something might take hold. Diane, listen to me. There's still a way to make this right. How? Bitter, hollow laughter. He'll destroy me. Gary, Mom, you one after another. And the second I move against him, I'm next. Not if we move first. Together. She held my gaze, hope and dread, fighting for the same ground. You believe me? I do. Diane, Brett's voice cracked up from downstairs like a whip. She flinched, scrubbed her face with her sleeve, and edged back. If he suspects Diane, I closed my hand around hers. When you're ready to get free of this, I'll stand with you. But the choice has to be yours. One squeeze, then she was gone. The lock snapped home. Alone, I turned over what she'd given me. Diane had been carrying this for 2 years. She'd held proof in her hands. Gary had tried to prepare her. Fear had sealed her. Could I still reach her? Could she find her way back? I drew out the Nokia and texted Loretta. Diane is breaking. She knows about Gary. Scared, but she might come through. Don't give up. Loretta's answer came back. Our daughter, yes, I typed. Our daughter is still there underneath the fear and abuse. I didn't know if I was right, but I had to act as if I was. Because if Diane stood against Brett when the moment arrived, we'd have everything we needed. And that moment felt very close now. I thought about the years I'd misread her silences as coldness, her distance as contempt, the missed calls, the clipped conversations, holidays she cut short. Every last memory rearranged into a pattern of survival I had never recognized for what it was. Brett had cut her off, rewritten the record, and eroded her trust in her own judgment. That was how he kept his hold. But fear fractures the moment truth gets spoken aloud. And today she'd spoken it. If she could grip that truth for even a few hours, it might be sufficient. Enough to stretch the clock, enough to shore up her nerve, enough to transform a victim into a witness at the moment that counted, and enough perhaps to pull us both out. That afternoon, Brett's phone rang somewhere just beyond my door. His footsteps shifted toward the hallway, away from anywhere Diane might listen, but these old walls carried sound well. I pressed close to the gap. "Vince, please." Brett's voice was pitched high and ragged nothing, like his usual polished delivery. A silence. Then, "I understand. 72 hours. Yes." Another pause. I could feel the threat bleeding through from the far end. 300,000. I know. I'm getting it. The old man has the money. He just needs to... Brett's voice cracked. "Vince, please." 2 more days. Just 2 days, and I'll have it all. Something on the other end came through sharp enough for me to catch the edges. "Don't care. Dead mother-in-law, my money. Start with your knees." 2 days, I swear. All his composure had dissolved. He was begging now, stripped bare. "Please don't." The line died. He drove his fist into the wall hard enough that the vibration reached me through the door frame. "God damn it!" Diane's footsteps came near. "What happened?" "Juan Spazzoni Tio Samskarawaitsind." Vincent Merlot happened. He wants his money now. But the lawyer said Dad's trust has requirements. "I don't care what Dunbar said." Venom flooded his voice. "Do you want me dead? Is that what you want? Because that's where this goes. If your father doesn't sign those power of attorney papers today, Brett, please. No, we're out of time. That old man will sign one way or another." Their steps faded away. I pulled back from the door and grabbed the Nokia, texted Vernon. Merlot gave the ultimatum. Brett has 72 hours. "He's unraveling, moving fast. Stand by." Vernon's reply. "Detective Bradshaw on standby." Loretta says, "Hold firm. We need full confession on recording." I wrote back. "Tell her I know, but Brett's cornered now. Cornered animals are the most dangerous kind." Easy for Loretta to say, "Hold firm," from Vernon's safe office. She wasn't sharing walls with a man who'd already killed once. But I'd faced worse odds in Vietnam. I could hold. The lock clicked. I barely tucked the phone away before Brett shouldered through the door papers in hand official documents dense with signature lines. "Sign these," shoved them at me. I let my eyes go slow and glassy, playing the bewildered old man. "What are these? Power of attorney. Lets me manage your finances while you're grieving. Standard procedure." I stared at the pages as though the words were in a foreign language. "I'm not sure." Brett's hand shot out, seized my collar, and hauled me forward with startling force. His breath hit me like the bottom of a bottle, not a drink or two, but the kind of volume that comes from pure desperation. "Sign the papers. I need to read them first." "You need to sign them." His voice was nearly a shriek. Then he reined himself in. Let go, smoothed my shirt, arranged his face into something approaching a smile, though it looked closer to a grimace. "Dad, please. This is for your own good. Loretta would have wanted you taken care of." I watched his other hand drift toward his jacket pocket, just a flicker, barely a moment, but I'd spent a lifetime reading exactly that kind of movement. Something rigid and angular bulged against the fabric. A gun. We're standing right at the edge of the moment everything changes. The pressure has been building for days, and the man across the hall is running out of road. Before I tell you what that final morning brought and what one desperate move would set in motion, let me ask you, when someone backs you into a corner, do you make your move early, or do you wait and let them show their hand first? He'd brought a gun into my bedroom. My military training shifted into overdrive. I took stock of everything: his position relative to the door, the gap between me and the radiator pipe beneath my pillow, whether I could close that distance before he cleared his jacket. The math wasn't in my favor. Not at 72 knees shot up against a younger man who already held every advantage. "I'll think it over tonight." I managed letting my voice tremble, though not entirely from performance this time. Brett's jaw locked so hard I could see the muscle twitching under his skin. "You'll sign tomorrow first thing, or we're going to be having a very different kind of conversation." His hand moved to his jacket again. A reminder, a warning. "Do you understand me, Walter?" The fact that he used my given name, not Dad, not even Mr. Caldwell, told me everything. The mask had come off. The pretense was finished. This was the real Brett, the man who'd killed my son and tried to kill my wife. I gave a slow nod. He left and locked the door behind him. I heard him throwing orders down at Diane. "Tomorrow morning, make sure he's ready." I picked up the Nokia with hands that weren't quite steady this time, not from acting. Texted Vernon. Brett, armed, threatened me. Tomorrow morning is his breaking point. If I don't sign, I think he'll turn violent. Loretta's reply came back through Vernon almost instantly. Get out. Go through the window now. I looked at the window, then thought about the recording device hidden beneath the floorboard. I was so close. Brett was coming apart at the seams. One more push, and he'd give me everything, not just the partial drunken scraps from before, but a full confession of what he'd done to Garrett. I texted back, "Not yet. I need his full confession. I need justice for Garrett." "Walter, no." I switched the phone off. By morning, this would be over. One way or the other, Brett would either confess to Garrett's murder on tape, or, well, I had the radiator pipe. And 50 years ago, in Vietnam, I'd understood that sometimes survival came down to who was willing to do what had to be done. I moved the pipe within arm's reach and settled in to wait for daylight. Through the wall, I could hear Brett pacing again, quicker now, more frantic. The 72-hour clock was winding down inside his head, and I could hear it pushing him toward the breaking point. Good. Let him pace. Let him panic. Because when morning came, one of us was going to crack, and it wasn't going to be me. I didn't sleep that night. I sat propped against the headboard, eyes fixed on the door. The radiator pipe lay across my lap, cold iron heavy enough to cave in a skull if it came to that. Every sound sent my pulse jumping. A floorboard groaning, the furnace cycling on the wind, working at the window glass. At 72, I had no illusions about defending myself against a younger man with a weapon. But I'd go down fighting. Dawn arrived slowly, pale light seeping in through the pane. I heard movement below, muffled voices, the clatter of dishes. Then footsteps climbing the stairs. The lock clicked. Diane stepped in carrying a breakfast tray. Strange given it was barely 8 in the morning. Their usual routine was 9 or 10, part of the deprivation schedule they'd been running on me. "Special breakfast?" she said, not once looking at my face. Brett insisted. I studied the tray. Scrambled eggs, buttered toast, apple juice. But something wasn't right. The eggs carried an odd sheen across the surface, like a film of oil sitting on still water. The toast was scorched darker along one edge, as though it had been charred and then scraped clean. The apple juice was cloudy. A faint sediment settled at the bottom of the glass. Military instinct, always check your food in hostile territory. "That's thoughtful of you," I said, keeping my voice easy. "But my stomach has been giving me trouble, all this stress. You need to eat, Dad. Keep your strength up." Her voice had that rehearsed quality, like someone running through lines fed to them beforehand. "Brett said you need a good meal before we discuss the papers, before I sign my life away," she meant, or before whatever else Brett had arranged. "Maybe just the toast." I lifted a slice, made a show of raising it to my mouth, but pressed it against my cheek and let my jaw do the rest. When Diane shifted slightly to set down the water glass, I slid the toast into my pajama pocket. "The eggs are still warm," she urged, and I caught something underneath her words. Desperation, fear, guilt. Her hands were shaking worse than the day before. Her eyes kept cutting to the door like she was braced for Brett to come crashing through it. "I really can't." I pressed a hand to my stomach. "I think I'm going to be sick." Then I produced a retching sound loud enough to sell it. Diane lurched back, the color going out of her face. "Let me get you some water." She nearly ran. Brett's voice came up hard from downstairs. "Did he eat it? He's sick. He couldn't." "Useless." I moved fast, grabbed a small portion of the scrambled eggs and crossed to the window. There was a potted plant on the windowsill outside, one of Loretta's herbs that had somehow outlived her. Rosemary. I thought, though, I'd never paid close attention to her gardening. I worked the window open and crumbled the egg into the soil, pressing it in so it wouldn't be obvious. If I was right about what had been put in that food, the plant would show it. Fast, I wrapped the toast in a tissue from the nightstand and pushed it under the mattress. Evidence if I survived long enough to use it. The rest of the day dragged by in taut silence. They brought lunch. I said my stomach was getting worse. Dinner? I told them I couldn't hold anything down. Each time I watched Brett's frustration build the jaw, clenching the hands, curling into fists. But he couldn't force the issue without raising questions. Later, once darkness had settled in, I used the Nokia's flashlight to check the plant outside. The leaves had gone brown at the edges, wilting, dying. I photographed it fast, my own hands trembling by then. Whatever they'd put in that breakfast, it was meant to kill. They'd tried to set up another natural death. Old man's heart gives out from grief and stress, nobody looks twice. Brett pockets the money and walks away clean, same as they'd attempted with Loretta. Same as they'd managed with Garrett. I texted Vernon the photos. Attempted poisoning via meal. Evidence photographed. Plant dead within 12 hours. His reply came back within seconds. Loretta says, tomorrow is the day. Final push. Stay alive until morning. Then a second message from Loretta herself. I love you. Please be careful. After tomorrow, this ends. I typed back, I love you too. Tell Detective Bradshaw to be ready and tell him to bring backup. I lay in bed that night, not sleeping, just resting with eyes shut and one hand on the radiator pipe, listening to Brett and Diane fighting somewhere below. His voice kept climbing, more urgent, more unraveling. I couldn't catch every word, but pieces floated up. Out of time. Merlot's deadline. But one way or the other, the Merlot deadline landed tomorrow. The power of attorney still hadn't been signed. The poison meal had failed. Brett was out of options, out of time, out of patience, which made him more dangerous than he'd ever been. I tightened my grip on the pipe and pressed myself flat against the wall, where the opening door would shield me. If he came tonight, if he decided violence was his last card to play, I'd be ready. But I also knew that come tomorrow, everything would be different. One way or the other, this war would end. I just hoped I'd live long enough to see Loretta's face again, to hold her, to tell her we'd made it. Through the wall came the crash of something breaking glass. It sounded like Brett's voice rising, Diane crying. The pressure was tearing him apart. Good. Let him fracture. Let him make his mistakes. Because when he made his final move in the morning, I'd be waiting. The recording device was in place. Detective Bradshaw was on standby. Loretta was out there, and this time Brett Farrow was not going to walk away. This time justice would have its day. The door opened at dawn. I hadn't slept. I'd been sitting there wide awake, the radiator pipe in my hand. But instead of violence, Brett walked in with red-rimmed eyes and tear-stained cheeks. He looked shattered, hollowed out. That's exactly when a man is most dangerous. I'm sorry, Dad, he said, his voice breaking on the words. I need to tell you the truth. I sat up slowly, keeping the pipe out of sight beneath my pillow. What truth? He sank onto the edge of the bedhead, dropping into his hands. A man at the absolute end of his rope. I've done terrible things. I'm so sorry. The performance was nearly convincing. I held my silence and waited. When I embezzled money from Caldwell Manufacturing, $287,000 over 2 years. He looked up at me, eyes raw with desperation. I have a gambling problem. Got in over my head with a loan shark. I know it's wrong. I know I've let you down. When Garrett found out, I said carefully, yes. Brett's voice fell to barely above a whisper. We argued about it. He was so angry. Dad said he'd turn me in, ruin my life, take Diane away from me. And then that night, Brett wiped his eyes, and I had to admit the tears looked genuine. Fear can do that, make a man cry, real tears, even while every word out of his mouth is a lie. He was so torn up about the embezzlement, about having to choose between me and everything the family stood for. He took pills, made it look like he'd been the one stealing, like the shame had simply become too much to bear. I felt rage rising in my chest like magma, but I kept my face neutral, my voice careful. You're saying Garrett took his own life? I tried to stop him. Brett grabbed my hand and I had to fight the urge to pull it away. I begged him not to, but he'd already swallowed them. By the time I understood what he'd done, there was nothing left to do. I should have called for help. I know that now. Instead, I panicked. I let everyone believe he was the embezzler because I was too much of a coward to own my own mistakes. Every word a precisely built lie, putting the blame on Garrett for his own murder, making my son the villain in a story where Brett was the monster. Why are you telling me this now? Because if you won't help me, Vincent Merlot's people will kill me today. The mask cracked wide open. Raw terror flooded his face, not remorse, fear for his own skin. I owe him $300,000. He gave me until noon. If I don't have the money, I'm dead. And you want me to sign over Loretta's trust? Just temporarily. I'll pay back every cent I promised Dad. I'll get help. I'll fix myself. I'll make everything right. He was crying now. Real tears, genuine terror. Not for what he'd done to others, but for what was about to happen to him. Please think of Diane. She'll be alone if they take me. I let on that I was considering it. Let the silence pull tight between us, like a wire stretched to its limit. I need time to think. We don't have time. His voice spiked. Then he caught himself and forced it back down. Please, Dad. I'm begging you. Tomorrow, I said. I'll give you my answer tomorrow morning. Tomorrow. He got to his feet abruptly, and for just a second, the mask fell away completely. I watched calculation move across his face like a shadow. Tomorrow I'll be... He stopped himself short. But I'd caught it. Seen the arithmetic he was running? If he'd be dead by tomorrow, then I'd have to give my answer today. One way or the other, the threat hung between us in the air like smoke. Brett left without another word. I heard him pacing below. Heard Diane's anxious voice asking things he wouldn't answer. That night, somewhere around midnight, I heard heavy footsteps just outside my door, slow, deliberate. The doorknob turned softly, someone checking whether it was still locked. I tightened my grip on the radiator pipe and pressed into the dark corner where I'd hold the advantage if he came through. The footsteps moved away. I sent Vernon one final text tomorrow morning. He's going to make his move. Be ready. His reply landed immediately. Bradshaw and team are 2 minutes away. Loretta is with us. Code word and we come in. I set the phone down and waited for dawn. Brett had said tomorrow I'd give my answer. He was right, but my answer wasn't going to be what he was expecting. Tomorrow he'd give his answer too about what he did to Garrett, about what he'd tried to do to Loretta and me. And this time, his answer would be recorded, witnessed and permanent. I knew Brett would come the next morning. I knew he'd bring a gun. And I knew one of us might not walk out of that room. Critical note: what you're about to hear includes fictionalized elements created for educational purposes. If that doesn't work for you, this is the right moment to stop. I completely respect that choice. I woke to the sound of metal sliding on metal, a weapon being prepared. My eyes snapped open. Pale dawn light came through the window. Brett's silhouette filled the doorway, and the outline of the gun in his hand left no room for doubt. This was it. Everything had been moving toward this moment. "Get up," Brett said. His voice was flat, stripped of emotion. Whatever desperation had been there yesterday had burned off overnight, leaving something colder behind, more controlled, more dangerous. I rose slowly, hands where he could see them. The radiator pipe was under my pillow, too far to reach now. "Brett, what are you—" "Living room now," he gestured with the weapon. "We're going to have that different conversation I mentioned." I walked ahead of him, my training doing what it always did, cataloging everything. His position behind me, the distance to the front door, whether Diane was in the house. The recording device back in my bedroom was useless to me here, but the Nokia in my pocket might still be something. He pushed me down into a dining room chair. Diane stood in the corner, her face as white as chalk, arms folded tight around herself. She wouldn't look at me. "Sign?" Brett dropped the power of attorney papers on the table and shoved a pen into my hand. "Brett, please." Diane's voice was barely audible. "Shut up." He didn't even glance at her. "Your father is going to sign these papers right now, or I'll make certain he never signs anything again." My heart was pounding, but I kept my voice level. "Before I sign, I need to know something." "You need—" He laughed, and there was nothing warm in it. "You don't need anything, old man. Tell me the truth about Garrett." The room went dead quiet. Something moved across Brett's face, surprise, then the quick click of calculation. "I already told you. He took his own life because—" "No." I cut him off, holding his eyes. "He didn't. Garrett didn't steal from Caldwell Manufacturing. He didn't gamble. None of what you claimed was true." "You're wrong. He found your books." I continued watching his expression closely. "He discovered you'd embezzled $287,000. He confronted you, gave you the chance to come clean." I leaned forward. "And you killed him for it." Diane gasped. Brett's grip on the gun went white-knuckled. "That's insane," he said, but the voice had changed. "Is it? Then tell me what actually happened that night, Brett. Tell me the truth about my son." Maybe it was the alcohol still working through his system from the night before. Maybe it was Merlot's deadline ticking like a fuse inside his skull. Maybe it was the belief that the gun in his hand made him untouchable. Whatever it was, Brett's control snapped. "Fine," he shouted. "You want the truth? Garrett was a self-righteous fool. He found my accounts, marched into my office like some kind of crusader, threatened to bring my whole life down." "So you killed him," I said quietly. "I handled it." Brett's face had gone scarlet, a vein standing out along his neck. "He said he'd go to you, go to the police. Said I'd end up in prison. Said Diane would leave me. He was going to destroy everything." Diane was sobbing in the corner. Brett ignored her entirely. "Garrett wouldn't hear reason." The words poured out of him now, like something infected draining from a wound. "So I had him over, told him we'd work it out. Brought out wine, expensive bottle, his favorite Pinot Noir. He didn't even notice when I added enough sleeping pills to put him down for good." My hands locked onto the table edge. "You watched him die." "I watched him sleep. Then I made it look like shame, like he was the thief, the gambler, the one who couldn't live with what he'd done. I planted the evidence, wrote the note on his computer, called 911 crying. He smiled bitterly. The police believed every word. You believed every word. And Loretta. His smile widened, and I could see the monster clearly now. Your wife got too clever for her own good. Found Garrett's journal, started pulling threads. So I put something in her afternoon tea one day. He shrugged like he was talking about the weather. Watched her collapse right there in your kitchen. Heart attack, the doctor said. So sad, so tragic. Diane screamed. No! Oh God, no! She's gone, Brett went on, his voice almost casual. Garrett is gone, and if you don't sign those papers right now, you'll... The front door exploded inward with a thunderous crash. Wood split. Flashlights cut through the dim room like searchlights through fog. Police dropped the weapon. Brett froze, the gun still leveled at me. His face drained white. Detective Bradshaw led the charge, 3 officers fanning out behind him, with weapons up and ready. Drop it now. In my pocket, the Nokia had captured everything. The code word hadn't even been needed. I'd switched on the audio recording before I'd left my bedroom just in case. Every word of Brett's confession was on tape. Every single word. Brett stood locked in place, the gun still pointed vaguely my direction, his face shifting from red fury to white shock in the span of a single heartbeat. He seemed unable to take in what was happening around him. Brett Farrow, drop the weapon, or we will fire. The gun hit the floor. Brett's hands went up slowly, mechanically, like a puppet whose strings had just been cut. Officers moved in fast. One swept the weapon away, while another wrenched his arms behind his back. No, Brett whispered. This isn't. How did you... Then I saw movement in the shattered doorway. Loretta stepped through the splintered frame. There was a stillness to her, a quiet authority that I hadn't seen since our working years. This was the Loretta who'd kept Caldwell Antiques on its feet for 30 years, who'd raised 2 kids, buried her parents, and held me together through the worst of my Vietnam nightmares. Unbreakable. That was the only word for her. Hello, Brett, she said, her voice level and low. Whatever color Brett still had left his face in one sweep. His jaw moved, but nothing came out. He tried to back away and stumbled against the officers gripping his arms. No, he finally got out. You're supposed to be dead. Loretta's voice could have frozen water. You made your attempt, I'll grant you that. But you've never once given me enough credit. This can't be happening, Brett whispered, watching her, the way a man watches something he buried come walking back through the door. And yet here I am, Loretta said. She came further into the room, and I caught sight of Vernon Pruitt at her shoulder and Attorney Gerald Dunbar just behind him. You put something in my tea, Brett. You thought I'd never see it coming, but I'd had my eye on you for weeks, just waiting for you to commit. Brett threw himself forward, straining against the officers. You've got nothing solid. It's one man's word. Not exactly, I said, on my feet now, Nokia already out of my pocket. What you're up against is your own voice. I turned the phone so he could see it. Every word you said in that room, all of it captured. The horror that crossed his face lasted only a second before desperation took its place. He spun toward Diane, still rooted to her corner. Diane, back me up. Tell them I was threatened, that he forced me to say what I already told them, Diane said, barely above a whisper. The room shifted. Everyone looked at her. She came forward, and that's when I noticed what I'd missed, a thin wire tracing from her collar along the inside of her sleeve. I've had this on since yesterday, she said, and her voice had found its footing now. Detective Bradshaw came to me. After Dad sat down with me, I made the call. I gave them everything. Something broke behind Brett's eyes, shock folding into fury, folding into the specific anguish of betrayal. You went to the police. You actually went to... I did, Diane said, tears cutting lines down her face. Because I'm done covering for you. Not for what you did to Garrett, not for what you tried to do to our parents. You little... He lunged, but the officers held. Detective Bradshaw moved in, cuffs up and ready. Brett Farrow, you are under arrest for the murder of Garrett Caldwell, attempted murder of Loretta Caldwell and Walter Caldwell, embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. As Bradshaw worked through the Miranda rights, Brett fought and screamed. You'll never make it stick. Garrett's certificate says suicide. There's no case here. Loretta stepped to my side and took hold of my hand. You couldn't be more wrong, she said without a tremor. She drew a small flash drive from inside her jacket. Every transaction, every gambling debt, every threatening message from Vincent Merlot, every fabrication you put into the world, it's all documented here. She held it out where he could see it. And on top of that, Garrett's private investigator held on to everything Garrett had uncovered. The genuine financial records ones that show you as the thief, not him. The timeline that puts you at Garrett's apartment the night he died. Building security footage of you carrying in a wine bottle. Her voice went to steel. The DA gets all of it by morning. The world is going to learn that Garrett died as a man of integrity trying to bring you down. His name gets cleared. His reputation comes back. "No!" Brett screamed as the officers started moving him toward the door. "No, Diane, help me, Diane, do something." But Diane had turned her back, weeping into her hands. Loretta let go of my hand and went to our daughter, wrapping her arms around her. "I'm sorry," Diane kept saying. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I could have stopped him. I should have fought harder for Garrett. I should have—" "Hush," Loretta murmured, one hand moving through Diane's hair. "We'll have that conversation. But tonight you did right. You kept your father alive." I watched them push Brett into the back of the patrol car, his shouting fading as the door slammed. Detective Bradshaw came over and stood beside me, head moving slowly side to side. "Mr. Caldwell, what you pulled off in there was reckless beyond measure. You understand you might not be standing here right now." "I understand," I said. "And now you've got your case." "We've got more than a case. Between the phone recording, Diane's testimony, the evidence Mrs. Caldwell and Vernon Pruitt put together, and Dr. Whitfield's account of the staged death, Bradshaw's expression was grim satisfaction. Brett Farrow isn't walking out of a courtroom a free man. The patrol cars rolled away, their sirens thinning as they disappeared into the morning. I stood on my front porch with Loretta's hand in mine. Alive. The two of us alive. After all of it, the grief, the fear, the long, dangerous performance, the nights. I didn't know if I'd see another one we'd come through. But I looked over at Diane on the porch steps, head bowed, face hidden in her palms, and I understood that what lay ahead wasn't easy either. Garrett's name had to be restored in public. Diane needed time and truth to heal. The family Brett had shattered had to be put back together piece by piece. Loretta squeezed my hand. No words needed. She was already there with me. One battle at a time. I said quiet enough that it was mostly for myself. She brought her head to rest against my shoulder. One battle at a time. 48 hours after Brett's arrest, the four of us gathered around a small table in a conference room. At the precinct, Loretta, next to me Diane, across with her own counsel. Detective Bradshaw placed a recording device on the table and set down 3 coffees in front of us, a different world from the dry crackers and lukewarm water Brett had called hospitality. "The recordings first," Bradshaw said, his laptop already open. "Mr. Caldwell, we've gone through everything the Nokia captured. Do you want to hear it played back?" I said yes, knowing full well it wouldn't get easier the second time around. Bradshaw hit play. Brett's voice came out of the speakers, small-sounding but crisp and unmistakable. "Garrett was a self-righteous fool. I added enough sleeping pills to put him down permanently. I made it look like shame. Your wife got too smart. I put something in her tea, watched her collapse." Loretta's grip on my hand went tight. Across from us, Diane covered her mouth with both hands, tears falling without a sound. When it cut off, Bradshaw said, "That recording alone would likely carry a conviction. But the rest of what we have," he laid files out across the table. I recognized pages from Garrett's journal. Others had Loretta's handwriting on the margins. Forensic accounting puts Brett Farrow at $287,000 embezzled from Caldwell Manufacturing across 27 months. The timeline lines up precisely with Garrett Caldwell's discovery and the gambling debts. "And Merlot?" I asked. Vincent Merlot confirmed the $300,000 figure. He's agreed to cooperate in return for consideration on separate charges. Bradshaw opened another folder. Merlot's own records show Brett making frantic partial payments in the run-up to Garrett's death, then a single large transfer the day after. Loretta went still. "Garrett's life insurance." "That's right. Brett had Diane named as beneficiary under Garrett's policy through Caldwell Manufacturing. $50,000. He put Diane's signature on the claim himself and collected the payout. A small pained sound escaped Diane. "I never knew that money existed." "Because it went straight to Merlot," Bradshaw said. It gave Brett room to breathe until the hole deepened again. The loop played out in my mind. Take money, lose it, take more, kill whoever finds out. Garrett had stepped into that loop, trying to shut it down. What about Loretta's death, the staged one? I said, pushing the word out. Dr. Leonard Whitfield's findings are in here. Bradshaw passed over a file. Dr. Whitfield confirmed he assisted Mrs. Caldwell in staging her death with a specialized sedative. He further confirmed that the tea Mrs. Caldwell substituted before drinking had been laced with a compound that, in the quantity present, would have caused cardiac arrest indistinguishable from natural causes. Loretta didn't waver. I kept a sample. It's been logged as evidence. Which brings us to Diane, Bradshaw said, and the way he looked at her carried something I didn't expect: gentleness. Miss Farrow, you're prepared to take the stand against Brett. Diane gave one nod. She had said almost nothing since the arrest. Her attorney, a composed and precise woman named Vivian Okafor, took over. My client will provide full testimony about 1. Garrett's warning to her in the days immediately before his death. 2. A text exchange she witnessed on Brett's phone. 3. The threats Brett made to keep her silent. 4. Her observations of Brett's escalating aggression and desperation in the weeks before Walter Caldwell's captivity. The wire recording, Bradshaw added, has Brett explicitly admitting he laced Walter's food. That constitutes attempted murder charge number 3. That was something I'd learned only the day before. Loretta's tea charge 1, my food charge 2. The one that hadn't landed because we'd moved in time, that was 3. When does he actually get charged? Loretta asked. Arraignment is tomorrow morning. The DA is going with first-degree murder of Garrett Caldwell. 2 counts of first-degree attempted murder for Loretta and Walter Caldwell. Embezzlement, fraud, forgery, conspiracy, and kidnapping, that last one, for confining Walter in his own bedroom. Bradshaw shut the laptop and took in each of us before he spoke again. In 20 years on this job, I've rarely seen a file this solid. Recorded confession, corroborating testimony, forensic accounting, medical evidence, physical evidence. He let that sit a moment. Brett Farrow will die in prison. I'd stake my career on it. Walking out into the daylight, I noticed Diane had fallen a few steps behind. Loretta and I slowed, and Diane caught up moving, like someone who'd set down a very heavy thing and wasn't quite sure how to walk without it. What's left for me now? She asked, her voice barely carrying. I knew something was wrong for 2 years. I saw that text message. I could have warned you both before he had the chance to hurt you. Vivian Okafor rested a hand on Diane's shoulder. We'll work through your situation together. You cooperated fully. You were ultimately the one who helped end it. The DA is weighing all of that. But I could read the question in Diane's eyes without her saying a word. Did cooperation cancel out silence? Did she deserve to be forgiven? I didn't have an answer, but as we walked to our cars, Loretta leaned close and said quietly, she put that wire on knowing what Brett might do if he found it. That's not nothing. Could be guilt driving her just as much as courage, I said. Maybe it was both, Loretta replied. Maybe it was both. The question of what justice looked like for Diane in a courtroom and in our family was still unanswered. Brett's arraignment was the next morning, but I knew Diane's reckoning was coming too in its own time. What shape it would take, I couldn't yet say. 3 weeks after Brett's arraignment, Loretta and I stood at the front of the conference room at Caldwell Manufacturing headquarters. Camera crews arranged their equipment along the walls. Reporters checked their audio setups. Attorney Gerald Dunbar went over his prepared statement one final time. Through the windows, I watched the parking lot fill former colleagues of Garrett's neighbors, people from the community who had spent 2 years believing a lie. Today we were going to tell them what actually happened. Dunbar took the podium first, careful and measured as always. Thank you for being here. 2 years ago, Garrett Caldwell died under circumstances that stunned this community and left his family shattered. The room quieted. Cameras clicked. Garrett was branded an embezzler and a gambler, a man who ended his own life because he couldn't face the shame of what he'd supposedly done. Dunbar paused, letting that version of events hang in the air one last time before he dismantled it. Today, with the full support of law enforcement and the district attorney's office, we correct the record. Garrett Caldwell was not a criminal. He was a man of integrity. He was a hero. A murmur moved through the crowd. Loretta's hand tightened around mine. Dunbar laid it out piece by piece, methodically. Garrett had uncovered Brett Farrow's embezzlement scheme. He'd gone to Brett privately, given him the chance to come clean and face the consequences honestly. Brett's response was to murder Garrett and pin the very crimes he'd committed on the man who'd tried to stop him. Garrett Caldwell died defending Caldwell, manufacturing its people and everything his family had built, Dunbar said. He deserves to be remembered not as a cautionary tale, but as a man who chose truth over his own safety and paid for that choice with his life. Then it was my turn. I walked to the podium and looked out at all those faces. For a moment, the words just weren't there. Then Garrett came back to me. At 8, sliding his report card across the kitchen table, nothing but A's, grinning, like he'd already conquered the world. At 16, beside me, under the hood of my old truck, hands dirty, asking better questions than most mechanics I'd known. At 25, shaking my hand outside Caldwell Manufacturing on his first day, saying, "I'll make you proud, Dad." He had. God, he had. My son died doing the right thing. I began, my voice coming out rougher than I intended. He found something wrong. He went straight to the source. He gave the man every chance to choose better. He tried to handle it with decency. I gripped the edges of the podium. Brett Farrow's answer was to end Garrett's life. Then he spent 2 years grinding Garrett's name into the dirt to keep himself covered. Every whispered word in this community, every time someone called my son weak or dishonest or troubled, that was Brett's lie walking around with Garrett's face on it. My vision went blurry. I didn't stop. I believed it. I believed the lie for 2 years. I thought my son was someone he had never been. That's a weight I'll carry the rest of my life. But today we take back the truth. Today Garrett gets his name back. Loretta came to stand beside me. We'd agreed ahead of time that she would speak too. Garrett was honest and brave and full of love, she said, steadier than I'd managed to be. He cared about this company and every person who drew a paycheck here. In the last days of his life, he was trying to protect all of you from someone who was robbing you blind. Her voice found more strength as she went. Today the truth is restored. Garrett Caldwell's name is cleared. His reputation is his again. And we will spend whatever years we have left making sure people know who he really was. The questions came quickly after that. Dunbar fielded most of them, but one reporter cut through to me directly. "Mr. Caldwell, 2 years passed while you believed your son had taken his own life. What does it feel like knowing that now?" I held the reporter's gaze. "It feels like grief with a second floor. I mourned Garrett, and then I mourned the version of him I'd been fed, a version that was never real. Learning the truth didn't bring him back, but it gave me back my son's memory without the poison in it. That means more than I can put into words." Afterward, people came up one at a time, former Caldwell Manufacturing employees, some with tears on their faces, some with anger still hot in their eyes, all of them shaken. A heavy-set older man came forward, Darnell Obert, who'd worked maintenance alongside Garrett for years. "I never bought it," he said, his voice thick. "Not for 1 minute. Gary once found $200 in the parking lot and spent the better part of a morning tracking down the person who dropped it. That isn't a man who steals." A younger woman approached, hanging back a little before she spoke. "Garrett walked me through my benefits paperwork when I had my daughter. Stayed 2 hours past the end of his shift to make sure I understood everything. I should have defended him when people started talking. I'm sorry I didn't. They kept coming. One remembrance after another. Patient Garrett, generous Garrett, honest Garrett. The son I had raised, finally visible again through all the wreckage Brett had made." That evening, Caldwell Manufacturing's board of directors put out an official statement. Caldwell Manufacturing deeply regrets the false narrative surrounding Garrett Caldwell's death. All records have been corrected to reflect the truth. Garrett Caldwell was the victim of fraud and murder, not the perpetrator. His employment record will reflect his integrity and dedication. A memorial scholarship in his name will be established for employees' children pursuing careers in business ethics. A plaque will be placed in the main office lobby reading Garrett Caldwell, integrity above all. Loretta and I stayed after everyone else had gone, sitting in the quiet of the emptied conference room. Through the glass, I could already picture where they'd mount Garrett's plaque. "He would be proud of you," Loretta said softly. "Of us?" I said. "We got here together." She brought her head to rest against my shoulder. Brett's trial was still ahead, and Diane's sentencing hearing was next month. One battle at a time. I reminded her the phrase had become something close to a prayer for us by now. But driving home that night, something settled inside me that I hadn't felt since before Garrett died. Not full peace. I would never stop missing him. Never stop replaying the conversations I'd never get to have. But peace about who he was. Brett had tried to steal both Garrett's life and his legacy. He'd managed the first. The second, Garrett's name. His honor, the memory of a decent man that was back where it belonged. And no verdict, no sentence could ever take it from us again. 5 months after Brett's arrest, I was sitting in a courtroom that smelled of aged wood and quiet dread. Loretta's hand trembled in mine as we watched our daughter rise before Judge Constance Delray, a jurist whose standing for fairness was equaled only by her impatience with self-serving explanations. Diane had on a gray suit that didn't fit the way it once had. The months of waiting, of knowing that her choices, whatever their cause, would be measured against the law, had worn her down visibly. Her attorney, Vivian Okafor, stood beside her with the composed bearing of someone who'd argued in rooms like this many times before. The gallery was thin. A handful of reporters occupied the back row's pens at the ready. Detective Bradshaw sat to our left, a steadying presence, and also a reminder of the distance we'd traveled to get here. The empty seat where Brett Farrow would have sat said everything on its own. He was waiting in a facility where the corridors were longer and the futures considerably darker. The court will come to order. Judge Delray's voice filled the room, and the noise died. The prosecutor, a deliberate man named Clifford Hensley, rose first. His presentation was stripped of sentiment. Diane Caldwell Farrow stood charged with accessory after the fact to homicide and obstruction of justice. The recommended sentence 3 years in state prison. Your Honor, Hensley said, while the defendant's cooperation has been acknowledged, the court cannot set aside the fact that she shared a household with a killer while multiple crimes were being planned and carried out. She had moments when she could have come forward. She did not. I felt Loretta go rigid against my side. This was the fear we'd been carrying since the arrest, that Diane's years of silence forced on her by terror and control would be read by the law simply as consent. Vivian Okafor rose, her posture relaxed, but her words precise. Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'd like to address the full context of my client's conduct. Judge Delray gave a single nod. Proceed, Ms. Okafor. Diane Caldwell Farrow is not a criminal. Your Honor, she is a survivor. Okafor's voice carried real weight. The evidence will establish that Brett Farrow spent 2 years isolating, threatening, and inflicting harm on my client in a deliberate pattern. She wore long sleeves through the summer to conceal bruising. She fabricated explanations for injuries to her face. Each day she lived in genuine fear for herself and for her parents. Okafor set a folder on the bench, medical records, photographs, written accounts from neighbors who'd heard what came through the walls. Garrett Caldwell. Diane's brother recognized what was happening. 3 weeks before his murder, he warned Diane that Brett was capable of the worst. She didn't grasp the full weight of that warning until it was already too late. The prosecutor shifted in his seat, visibly uneasy. This was the wrinkle in his tidy case, the murky territory of domestic violence, where victims so often looked like accomplices. When Diane discovered the text on Brett's phone, problem solved, brother-in-law won't talk now, everything crystallized. Make sure old man believes the story, Vivian Okafor continued. Brett had told her that if she said a word, he would kill her father, pin Gary's death on her, and make sure she never saw sunlight again. She believed him because she'd already witnessed what he could do. Judge Delray's expression stayed carefully neutral, but I caught her eyes move toward Diane, one woman reading another woman's suffering. Loretta asked permission to address the court. The judge granted it. My wife rose slowly, her voice holding steady even as tears threatened to surface. Your Honor, my daughter made choices that came from fear, not from cruelty. When she finally summoned the courage to wear that wire and help Detective Bradshaw, she put everything on the line. She knew Brett might kill her. She did it anyway. That doesn't excuse her silence, but it ought to count for something. I rose. Next, my old soldier's bearing, returning despite the months of confinement and near starvation. Diane is my daughter, Your Honor. She made decisions I wish she'd made differently, but she was in the grip of a predator who murdered my son and tried to murder my wife and me. When the moment arrived to stand on the side of justice, she stood, and that matters. Diane herself spoke last, her voice little more than a whisper. I failed you, Gary. I should have seen it sooner. I should have been braver. She wiped her eyes and forced herself to hold the judge's gaze. I can't undo my silence, but I can spend whatever time I have left, making sure others don't repeat my mistakes. I want to help women like me, women who don't know how to get out, who believe that love means enduring the pain. Judge Delray settled back in her chair, fingers steepled. The courtroom stopped breathing. Mrs. Farrow, the judge began. What was done to you was a profound injustice. Brett Farrow is a manipulative and violent predator, and you were already his victim, long before you became tangled in his crimes. She let that land before continuing. However, the law demands accountability. Your silence allowed a murderer to go free for years. Your cooperation ultimately helped bring him to justice, but it cannot undo the damage caused by your inaction. I tightened my grip on Loretta's hand. Therefore, Judge Delray went on, I am sentencing you to 5 years of probation with strict conditions. You will attend therapy twice a week with a licensed trauma specialist. You will complete 500 hours of community service at a domestic violence shelter, where you will draw on your own experience to help other women recognize and escape abusive relationships. You will have no contact, direct or indirect, with Brett Farrow. Violation of any condition will result in a 3-year prison sentence. The gavel came down and the sound rolled through the room like a thunderclap. Diane collapsed into Vivian Okafor's arms, sobbing. Loretta and I stood motionless, absorbing the mercy and the gravity of it in equal measure. Probation, not prison. A chance, not an ending. As we filed out of the courtroom, Diane walked between us, not quite reconciled, not quite forgiven, but not quite lost either. She stopped on the courthouse steps, the autumn wind cutting straight through the thin fabric of her suit. Thank you, she whispered, looking at us both. I don't expect forgiveness, not yet, maybe not ever, but I'll spend every day trying to earn it. Loretta reached out hesitant and touched Diane's cheek. Healing takes time, sweetheart, for all of us. I said nothing. Words felt like the wrong instrument. Instead, I thought of Gary of the Sun, who'd tried to pull his sister away from a monster. I thought of the long road stretching ahead, the therapy sessions, the community service hours, and the question that would shadow all of us. Could a family shattered by violence and betrayal ever truly be put back together? Only time held that answer. But as we walked down those courthouse steps side by side, I let myself hold the smallest flicker of hope. Brett Farrow was behind bars awaiting trial for murder. Gary's name had been cleared, and Diane, damaged, haunted, but alive, had been handed a chance to rebuild. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was a beginning. 8 months after Diane's sentencing, Loretta and I stood outside a freshly renovated office building on the east side of town. Morning light caught the brass plaque beside the entrance and made it gleam. The Garrett Caldwell Foundation for Elder Justice. After everything, we'd found a way to carry our son's memory forward that felt right. Inside, the office smelled of fresh paint and possibility. Vernon Pruitt was arranging furniture desks, filing cabinets, a small conference table. Gerald Dunbar was hanging certifications on the wall, his movements precise and deliberate. 2 social workers Loretta had brought on were unpacking boxes of case files and reference materials. A volunteer coordinator named Nadette Cruzon was setting up a phone system that would become a lifeline for families in crisis. The Foundation's mission was straightforward support, elderly victims of financial exploitation and abuse fund investigations into suspected crimes, provide legal assistance to families who couldn't afford it on their own. We'd seen firsthand how predators zeroed in on the vulnerable, how isolation became a weapon, how silence shielded the guilty. Gary had died trying to drag that darkness into the light. Now, we would carry that work forward. The Foundation drew funding from several sources. Loretta's investment portfolio supplied the initial capital. The embezzled funds recovered from Caldwell Manufacturing, every dollar Brett had stolen, went straight into the Foundation's accounts. And donations had poured in from people moved by Gary's story, by the injustice of a hero branded a thief. Vernon had agreed to serve as chief investigator. His decades of experience as a landlord and close observer of human behavior made him unusually well-suited to detect manipulation and financial abuse. Dunbar offered pro bono legal counsel 2 days a week, his expertise in estate law proving invaluable. The social workers, both veterans of elder care advocacy, brought compassion and institutional knowledge. Nadette coordinated volunteers and managed the hotline, her bilingual skills ensuring the Foundation could reach the city's full, diverse population. The ribbon-cutting ceremony drew a crowd that surprised us. Detective Bradshaw attended alongside several officers who'd worked Gary's case. Local news cameras caught Loretta's speech, her voice steady beneath the current of emotion running through it. Neighborhood business owners came out to show their support. Caldwell Manufacturing sent representatives their presence, a quiet acknowledgement of the company's role in Gary's vindication. And Diane stood in the back row, silent but there. She wore plainclothes jeans and a sweater, and her face carried the look of someone learning to live alongside regret. Our eyes met briefly. I nodded, she nodded back. Not forgiveness, not yet, but recognition. My son died trying to expose financial crime and protect people who couldn't protect themselves, Loretta told the crowd. We can't bring him back, but we can honor him by continuing what he started, by making sure what happened to our family never happens to another. She unveiled a photograph of Gary that would hang in the foundation's lobby, a candid shot from his 30s, laughing at something out of frame, his integrity plain in every line of his face. Beneath it, a bronze plaque read, "Garrett Caldwell, integrity above all." The applause was respectful and heartfelt. But the real moment came afterward, when a young woman approached us clutching a folder of documents. "My name is Catalina Ibarra," she said, her English accented but clear. "I think my grandfather is in trouble. His caregiver, his own son, is stealing from him. But Abuelo is afraid to report it. He thinks no one will believe an old man with a confused mind." Loretta took her hand, her grip firm and reassuring. "We'll help you, Catalina. That's exactly why we're here." Vernon stepped forward, already shifting into investigator mode. "Tell me everything you've noticed. Changes in bank statements, unexplained withdrawals, new signatures on documents. Even small details matter." Catalina's eyes filled with tears of relief. Thank you so much." As Vernon guided her toward his office, Dunbar joined me by the window. "You've built something good here, Walter. Gary would be proud." "He'd probably tell us we're doing it all wrong," I said, managing a small smile. "He was never satisfied with good enough." "Neither are you," Dunbar observed. "That's why this will work." By the close of that first day, 3 more families had come through our doors. 3 more stories of exploitation, isolation, fear. 3 more chances to make Gary's death mean something. That evening, as Loretta and I locked up the office, she turned to me with a thoughtful look. "Diane has completed 200 hours of community service at the shelter. She's asked if she can volunteer here, help victims of domestic abuse use what she lived through to help them spot manipulation." I leaned against the doorframe, turning it over. "What do you think?" I think that Loretta chose her words carefully. "I think maybe in time, she's still our daughter, Walter, and she's trying." 14 months after Brett's arrest, Loretta and I drove to Farinelli's restaurant, a neutral location, Diane's suggestion. I pulled into the parking spot and noticed Loretta's hands trembling slightly in her lap. "We can leave if it becomes too much," I said quietly. "No." Her voice was firm, resolute. "We said we'd try, so let's try." Farinelli's had been in the same family for 3 generations, the kind of place that earned its longevity through honest cooking, and the sort of warmth you can't manufacture. White linen tablecloths, candles in brass holders, the smell of garlic and fresh bread drifting from the kitchen. Gary's 30th birthday had brought us here back in the days before everything went wrong. Diane walked in right on time. Something about her was different, stripped down, unguarded. The layers were gone. No armor of cosmetics, no clothing chosen to signal status. Plain jeans, a simple blouse, a single piece of jewelry. She seemed, for the first time, in longer than I could remember, like the girl we'd raised. "Thank you for being here," she said, the words carrying a tremor she couldn't quite suppress. We found our way to a booth in the back, stumbling through hellos that didn't fit right. The waiter set down menus. We talked about nothing. The cold snap outside, what looked good on the menu. Anything to avoid the thing hanging over all 3 of us like smoke. The gaps in conversation grew heavy. At last, Diane put her glass down and squared her shoulders. "I won't pretend this is comfortable," she said, "or that I've earned the right to be sitting across from you. I haven't, but I need you to see what I've been doing, not to score points with you, but because it's the work I have to do." Her phone came out. She scrolled through photographs and turned the screen toward us. Diane seated beside women at the shelter, women whose eyes held a hollow familiarity, the same look that had lived in her own face not so long ago. Diane standing at Gary's grave with fresh flowers in her arms. Diane mid-session face wet with tears. "I talk to him," she said, her voice dropping. "Every Sunday. I sit with him and I tell him about the women I've been able to reach. The ones I recognized because I was them, cornered, terrified, certain the walls had no doors. Loretta's fingers closed around my hand beneath the table. My therapist gave me a framework for it, Diane went on. Complex trauma response. It doesn't excuse any decision I made, but it helps me understand the grip that fear had on me. Why I took Brett at his word when he said he'd kill you, Dad, the moment I opened my mouth. Why I persuaded myself that going quiet was the only thing standing between everyone I loved and catastrophe. Tell me about the shelter, Loretta said softly. Something in Diane's face eased. I work intake. Women show up usually after midnight, usually with nothing more than what's on their backs. I walk them through the paperwork, help them settle in, but mostly what I do is sit and listen. Last week there was a woman named Carla. Her husband had spent years drilling into her that she was unstable, that the moment she tried to report him, everyone would line up behind him, family, neighbors, all of them, because he had them fooled. Diane's voice caught. I recognized every part of what she described, so I told her what had happened to me, not to pull focus onto myself, but to hand her proof that someone had climbed out the other side. Did it reach her? I asked. She's still at the shelter. She's still safe. I can't ask for more than that. The waiter reappeared, and we ordered more or less at random, none of us really present for it. After he left, Loretta asked the question she'd been carrying the whole evening. Do you hold us responsible, Diane, for failing to see what Brett was doing? Diane's expression sharpened with something close to alarm. Never. Not for a single moment. Brett was a craftsman when it came to deception. He engineered it so that I never cracked in front of you. The isolation didn't happen all at once. It was so gradual I couldn't feel it closing around me until it was already complete. She stretched her hand partway across the table, stopping before she reached Loretta's. The only blame I carry is for not believing you were the kind of people I could run to. He told you he'd murder your father, Loretta said, her voice splintering. That isn't a failure of trust, sweetheart. That's what survival looks like. Something gave way. Diane came apart entirely, and Loretta moved around the table and folded her into her arms. I watched from across the booth, my wife and my daughter holding each other, and felt something shift behind my sternum. Not healed, not resolved, but fractionally lighter. We made an attempt at the food when the crying passed. It was good. We didn't register it. What we did instead was talk. Really talk, the kind we hadn't managed in years. Diane walked us through the therapy, the PTSD diagnosis, the antidepressants that had taken the worst edge off her panic. Loretta described the support group she'd joined, families of survivors, all of them learning the same hard lesson, that loving someone is not the same as having the power to pull them free. But Gary knew, Diane said, the words arriving suddenly. 3 weeks before Brett killed him, Gary caught me alone at a family dinner. He told me Brett was capable of anything that I needed to watch myself. I didn't grasp what he was warning me about until the chance to act on it was gone. My son. His last gesture toward his sister, made while his own life was already in the crosshairs. He loved you, Diane, every last day. I know, she whispered, and I let him down. No, Loretta said, her voice iron. Brett let him down. Brett is the one who failed this entire family. You were his victim, same as Gary. The conversation found lighter ground eventually. Diane talked about enrolling in community college, about a pull towards social work, about the modest apartment she was paying for herself, with what a part-time job brought in. Small, ordinary, real. As we gathered our things to go, she paused outside by the cars. About the foundation, would there be a place for me? Nothing visible. Just support work, filing phones, whatever needs doing. I caught Loretta's eye, the look that 46 years of marriage had turned into its own language. We'll give it thought, I said carefully. Not now, not never, just open. Diane held that. A chance is all I'm asking for. Small steps, Loretta said. But small steps. The goodbye wasn't a hug that would have been a lie about where we stood. A handshake felt like a courtroom formality. We ended up simply standing together in the parking lot, the three of us, long enough to acknowledge the road still ahead before we went our separate ways. Driving home, Loretta leaned her head against the cold window glass. It isn't forgiveness, she said. Not yet. No, I said, but it's a foothold. That was enough for one night. 2 years after Loretta came back to us, I stood at Gary's grave on a clear October morning, Loretta at my side, Diane a few steps behind. The three of us in silence. The stone was new. The old one with its false story of suicide was gone. This one read, Garrett Caldwell, 1987 to 2022. Hero seeker of truth, forever loved. Loretta laid yellow chrysanthemums against the base. Diane leaned close and whispered, "Hey, big brother, I'm working on being someone you'd be glad to know." I watched my daughter, 2 years of watching her become someone else, or maybe someone she'd always been underneath. Paid coordinator at the shelter now, and freshly accepted into a graduate program in clinical psychology trauma, counseling her focus. 18 months sober, finding her way back to us. Not all the way home, maybe that was never on the map, but far enough to matter. From the cemetery we drove to the Foundation's offices, its 2-year anniversary. Inside the place had the hum of a working engine. Vernon was at his desk reviewing surveillance footage on a fresh case. Dunbar sat across from a client family. Nadette ran the volunteer board with one hand and fielded the hotline with the other. 2 former detectives worked their way through a stack of financial records. The numbers said everything. 47 families in year 1, 83 in year 2. $2.3 million in stolen assets recovered, 17 criminal prosecutions filed. But the faces mattered more than the figures. Catalina Ibarra's grandfather, out from under his son's thumb. A widowed woman systematically bled by a financial advisor. A veteran whose own child had been raiding his disability payments. Every one of them was Gary's purpose carried forward. Loretta stood before the staff and volunteers. 2 years ago, we walked in here weighted down with grief. Today we stand here with something we didn't expect to have this soon: hope. Hope that justice doesn't always lose, that the truth can still mean something, that a single act of courage, one person refusing to be silenced, can send ripples further than anyone imagines. The wall behind her held photographs, the families, the cases, the faces. Gary's portrait anchored the center, and beside it, a framed excerpt from his journal. "If I don't make it through this, I hope someone continues the fight. Not for revenge, but for protection, so that what's happening to me and my family never happens to another person." That's what integrity means. Standing up even when it costs you everything. Nobody made a sound. Detective Bradshaw, retired, now was the first to speak. 32 years on the job, I have rarely watched a family do what this one has done, take the worst thing that ever happened to them and build something with it. Gary would be damn proud. Late in the reception, Diane appeared at my elbow. "Can we step outside for a minute?" "Up boy disturbed, when did was told." Autumn light in the parking lot. She turned to face me. "The acceptance letter came," she said. "Clinical psychology program. Full scholarship. They based it on my shelter work." "Diane, that's wonderful. 3 years intensive. I'll still be here, just not as often." She held my gaze. "I want you to understand I'm not pulling back. I'm not retreating. I'm moving towards something, toward being the kind of person who could have helped someone like me. Your mother and I are proud of you." Her eyes went bright. "You don't owe me that, Dad. I don't offer what I don't mean. That's always been true of me, and you've always known it." She let out a small breath that became just barely a smile. "Yeah, I do." That evening, Loretta and I came home back to the house where so much of the horror had unfolded. Selling had crossed our minds, but Loretta held firm. Staying, she said, was part of taking it back. Loretta had repainted every room, swapped out the furniture, filled the place with light and greenery until it felt like ours again. We cooked dinner together, small domestic rituals, chopping vegetables, watching the pasta, arguing over the garlic. These were the real victories. Not Brett's life sentence, not the public vindication. But this, the laughter in our own kitchen, the grocery list for next week. The ordinary life rebuilt on the far side of extraordinary damage. The phone rang. Diane, her voice lighter than I'd heard it in years. "I forgot to mention Ohio State University accepted me too. Their trauma specialization is supposed to be the best in the country." Loretta's eyes filled. When she hung up, she turned to me with something I hadn't seen on her face in a long time, pure, unclouded joy. "Our daughter is coming back, Walter." "She never really left," I said. "She just got lost for a while." We took our plates to the back porch and watched the sunset go gold and orange across the sky. Tomorrow we'd be back at Gary's work. More families, more predators to expose. But tonight, we simply sat in the quiet together. 2 people who'd survived a war in our own home against an enemy who'd worn the mask of family. "You know what I keep thinking about?" Loretta asked, her hand finding mine. "That call from Vernon 2 years ago. If you hadn't picked up, if you hadn't trusted him." "But I did," I said simply. I answered. I dug in. I made it. We made it, Loretta said. Together. I thought of Gary, the son who died defending the truth, of Diane pulled back from the dark, of the families we'd reached, of Loretta who'd risked everything for justice. Tomorrow would ask more of us. But tonight, we were simply Walter and Loretta Caldwell, alive side by side, at peace. In the fading light, Loretta's face was still fierce, still beautiful. She caught me watching and smiled. "What's on your mind, old soldier?" "That we did it," I said. "We came through the worst thing a family can face. Not unscathed, not unchanged, but together. And that's enough." I squeezed her hand. "That's everything." The sun dropped below the horizon. Somewhere Brett Farrow sat in a prison cell. Somewhere Diane was mapping out her future. If you've stayed with me all the way to the end of this one, I want to say thank you. Truly, this story cost me something just to tell it. Looking back at everything Walter and Loretta walked through, the betrayal, the grief, the years of not knowing what was real. What strikes me most is how long darkness can wear a familiar face. A son-in-law at the dinner table, a forged signature, a cup of poisoned tea. Evil doesn't always announce itself. And yet, I believe God placed the right people in the right rooms at the right moments. Vernon, Dr. Whitfield, Detective Bradshaw, not by accident, but by design. Justice came. It was slow and it was painful and it left marks. But it came. Here is what I take from Walter and Loretta's story, and I hope you'll carry it too. First, if something feels wrong in your family's finances or health trust, that instinct and act on it. Silence is the predator's greatest ally. Second, document everything. Garrett's journal is what broke the case open. Write it down. Third, if someone you love is trapped in abuse and fear, keep the door open. Diane found her way back because the door was never fully closed. Fourth, rebuilding after betrayal is not a single moment. It is 1,000 small decisions to keep going anyway. This is the kind of family revenge story that doesn't let you go easily, and it shouldn't. For those of us in the adults 50-plus chapter of life, these battles over estates, over trust, over the people we raised, are more common than anyone wants to admit. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment and tell me which part of this story stayed with you. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe to Honor Revenge Stories so you don't miss what's coming next. Thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next one.